welcome, but we're also going to have a surprise visit from one of our SACAC leaders as well. Our first session is Trauma-Informed Practices in Schools by Ms. Nakita Scott. Our next session will be Changes and Updates to FAFSA and Bright Future Scholarship by the man, the myth, the legend, I like to say, Mr. Pete Hernandez. And then we're going to wrap up with Hello Xello with Ms. Noah Lipton and a closing remarks by our SACAC president, Ms. Zaire McCoy. Okay, I'm excited to invite and to welcome you all, Mr. Corey Bailey. He has been a huge help in helping me with planning and preparing for this event today. So Mr. Bailey, if you are available, he serves as the State and Area Initiatives Chair and on the board for SACAC. I would love for you to welcome our guests.
Good morning, Monique, and to everybody else that's in attendance today. We are so excited for the drive-in workshop to take place today. I know that Monique has worked extremely hard to organize this event, and y'all, this is not an easy task. Each of our state representatives for state and area initiatives, specifically for the drive-in workshops, they each have a co-chair or a co-coordinator. And so it's usually a two-teamed effort or a two-person team effort. But Monique's co-coordinator was going to be new this year, and she just so happened to be a graduate student as well. And so I think it was her first semester as a grad student, plus working, doing this as a volunteer opportunity. And so she bowed out pretty early when she realized that what kind of time we were looking at here. But Monique has carried the torch. She has done this solo. And I think you're going to really enjoy the program that she's put on today. So I am excited for you. I know it's going to be some great sessions. And for all of our presenters, I just want to take the time to thank you for the effort that you've also put into organizing your sessions in advance. I know that your professional areas and wisdom is going to be well received among the membership and participants today. So I just want to thank you for showing up and sharing your knowledge with us so that we can all be better in our professions and our daily work and personally as well. So aside from that, I do hope that you walk away, especially if you're joining us this morning and you're not a member of SACAC, I hope that you walk away wondering like, hey, this SACAC that I learned about and heard about, like, I wonder what other programs are available. So if that ends up being you, there is still time to join for SACAC membership, and you can go to our website, sacac.org, learn all about who we are, learn about our different committees, learn about our mission, learn about all of our programs, and through that membership, know exactly what type of resources could come your way in the end. I think Florida is rounding us out of the drive-in workshops for SACAC this year. And so I've observed the question, it never fails that technology either messes up for someone and they have to leave early, or they get cut out early, or something comes up. And so I get the email, hey, where can I find this recording? Is it going to be somewhere? And it is. If you get disconnected or just want to go back and revisit something you heard, you can always go to our YouTube channel. We have a YouTube account with SACAC. You'll have to type in SACAC. I learned that the other day. I was trying to type in the whole acronym and that did not work. But if you type in SACAC, you'll find our account. And every one of our programs on behalf of SACAC that are recorded, you can find those there. So at the conclusion of this event, once we've got the recording, our executive assistant for SACAC will clean that up and then post it on YouTube, so you can always go and access it there. And then also in the coming days, you should also receive a post-event summary. And so I would encourage you to make sure that you look out for that email, give us your feedback so that we can continue to bring quality programs that speak to your needs, that are timely and efficient for you and your time. So please fill that out. And then also There is one session in this morning's program that qualifies for CE clock hours. And so if you are in need of that, that post-event summary will also have instructions for how you go about requesting those hours. So make sure that you submit that accordingly as well. So that is all of the time that I'm going to take up for you this morning, because I promise you what's to come is more important than anything that I could tell you this morning. So that is all the housekeeping that I have. But again, I just want to reiterate, thank you so much to Monique and to all of our wonderful presenters this morning.
Thank you so much, Corey, and thank you for all of your support as well. So let's get this party started. Super excited for today's session. Again, I hope you have your coffee or your water or tea, because it's going to be a good one and you're not going to want to miss out. Thank you for reiterating that the session will be recorded, Corey. So once again, you can always go back and reference this material. Our first presenter, I'm excited to introduce, because I've known for years, Miss Nakita Scott. Nakita Scott is a licensed clinical social worker with prior training and experience as a behavioral health specialist in the Florida Army National Guard, a high school teacher, and a social worker. Nakita has over 15 years in working with the adolescent and adult populations with respect to mental health. Nakita currently owns and manages Grace Hope Counseling of Florida, a group mental health practice located in Winter Haven, Florida. Nakita is also the founder and chair of the Graceful Hope Foundation, a mental health nonprofit organization that seeks to ensure quality and affordable access to care for individuals who are uninsured and demonstrate financial need. Nakita is currently pursuing her doctorate in social work through Barry University with a focus on trauma-informed care and perinatal mental health. I'm excited to turn it over to Ms. Nakita Scott for your first session, Trauma-Informed Practices in Schools. Nakita, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Monique. I greatly appreciate it. Can everybody hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Okay. So today we're going to talk about trauma-informed care in schools. It will start off talking about Monique, will you be advancing the slides for me? Or do
I absolutely will. And were you
Okay.
going to turn your camera on or leave it off? Just trying to clarify.
I can do it either way, turn it on or leave it off. I'm fine either way.
Not a problem. I just wanted to make sure you had access to do so, but you can leave it on or off.
Okay. So if you can go to the next slide, please, I greatly appreciate it. Okay. So our objectives for today are to understand the common causes of childhood trauma, to learn and understand the foundations of trauma-informed practices, and to learn school-based strategies for addressing trauma responses in school-age children and adolescents. Next slide, please. There we go. So some of the main sources of trauma exposure that we'll talk about is prenatal exposure in utero, the intergenerational transmission of trauma, and then witnessed or lived experiences of traumatic events. So what is trauma? Trauma is the result of feeling overwhelmed and unable to cope with an emotional or physical experience or event that produces increased amounts of stress, physical sensations, and psychological disruption. There are different types of trauma. Acute trauma occurs when an individual experiences only one event and is able to process their feelings surrounding that event immediately after the event occurs. Chronic trauma is when an individual experiences repeated events or has prolonged exposure to experience or events. And then complex trauma occurs as a result of the accumulation of or exposure to multiple chronic traumatic experiences or events. Thanks. So when we talk about the students that you encounter every day, what we're looking at is that some students actually may be predisposed to trauma outcomes. So children can be exposed to trauma in utero based on the mother's or birthing person's maternal stress levels. So cortisol is the stress hormone that's in the body. There's a certain amount of cortisol that's necessary to maintain pregnancy, but what we know is that excess cortisol beyond the amount needed to maintain pregnancy can actually lead to changes in fetal brain development. So this is reducing head circumference, which affects attentiveness in adolescence, and then changing the infant amygdala, which affects emotional regulation and affectivity. Next slide, please. Okay. So when we talk about students being predisposed to trauma, what we're really talking about is the intergenerational transmission of trauma. And so this process is based on what's called epigenetics. And so what epigenetics basically says is that in our DNA proteins, we carry the knowledge for certain things to happen in our body. So when you have a doctor say that you're predisposed to diabetes, high blood pressure, obesity, or heart disease, what they're really talking about is that epigenetic process. So we can all have the opportunity in our DNA proteins to express certain things, but not every one of those traits may be expressed. So this process of epigenetics basically came about due to the studies of Holocaust survivors. And what they found is that in their DNA proteins, Holocaust survivors, their children, actually carry 3 generations of that trauma within their genetic profile. Next slide, please. So sources of trauma. So we talked about, if you haven't already heard about it, the Adverse Childhood Experiences questionnaire, which talks about trauma in terms of relationship. So relationship between the caregiver and the child. However, there are other sources of trauma outside of what the ACEs discusses. So those other sources of trauma could be exposure to community violence, exposure to school violence, having to undergo multiple medical procedures, or even being exposed to a parent or caregiver in the home that's going through chronic medical issues. So that would be what we would call vicarious trauma. Serious or untreated parental mental illness, loss or separation from a parent or a loved one, exposure to natural and man-made disasters. If you have students in your schools who have refugee status, or who are undocumented immigrants or documented immigrants, just their cultural experiences, if they've had to flee their country of origin, discrimination and poverty. Poverty could include food insecurity as well, having to move from place to place. So we're talking about instances of homelessness as well, and having to change schools. Next slide, please. Okay, so the neurobiology of trauma. What we know about trauma from a neurological standpoint is one, that we have 2 nervous systems. So we have our central nervous system and our peripheral nervous system. Our peripheral nervous system is divided into 2 parts. Our somatic nervous system, which is about the voluntary things that we can control with our body, and the autonomic nervous system. So that's involuntary things. So the autonomic nervous system, those involuntary things include our breathing, our heart rate, our digestion, so those bodily processes that happen outside of our control. The autonomic nervous system is then divided into 2 parts, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Our sympathetic nervous system is what engages us into those fight and flight reactions. And then the parasympathetic nervous system is what calms our body. Now, the parasympathetic nervous system houses what's called the vagus nerve, and this is the 10th cranial nerve that actually goes throughout our entire body. So if you actually place your hands on your neck behind your ears, you're actually touching your vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is divided into 2 parts, dorsal and ventral. And we'll get to the next slide, will tell us why that's important. Okay, so polyvagal theory, which really talks about the vagus nerve, was developed by Dr. Stephen Porges. And this theory explains the physiological and psychological safety based on this particular nerve. So when we talk about, from a trauma perspective, about how your students are behaving, What we're looking at is if they are in ventral vagal, if they're in sympathetic activation, and we're in dorsal vagal. So I want you to think about how you're feeling right now, whether or not you're in ventral vagal, if you're in sympathetic activation or dorsal vagal, or even thinking about when a time where you felt like you were angry or you were upset, you felt threatened, you felt anxious. Okay, so that anxious state is really what we're looking at, is between dorsal vagal and sympathetic activation. So ventral vagal basically states, I see the world or my environment as safe. Therefore, I can be social, I can be relaxed, and I can be calm. When a client or student has a trauma stressor, so we replace trauma stressor with the word triggered. When they experience a trauma stressor, then that state changes to where they get to sympathetic activation. So that is that fight or flight response. So this can come out as agitation. This can come out as argumentative. This can come out as if you've had students throw a desk or flip a desk over or leave the classroom. Or the other reaction can be what's called dorsal vagal. And so that is the freezer shutdown. So if you ever have seen a student where they don't talk at all, maybe they put their hood over their, over their head, and they put their head on their desk and they don't say anything at all, and they're just completely disengaged. This is what dorsal vagal will look like. Next slide, please. And so, as I said before, when a student is in dorsal vagal, basically that is they feel threatened, they collapse, they shut down. This can also be some unhealthy coping behaviors. So if you see students engaging in cutting or self-injury, despair or hopelessness, this may also be where you see that suicidal ideation as well. And the fight or flight, the sympathetic portion of the vagal state, this is where students experience chronic stress or anxiety, conflict in relationships. So that might be conflict with teachers, conflict with other staff, and conflict with other students, or even conflict at home. When a student is in ventral vagal in that social engagement, right? So they're engaging in classroom activity, they're engaging with their peers, they're doing well in school, they're able to be resourceful, they're able to be connected to the school system. And so this is where we kind of want to see students get to. Next slide, please. Okay, so how does trauma affect the brain? So trauma, in a sense, is a perceived threat to our physiological or physical safety. And I like to say perceived because what may be traumatic for you may not necessarily be traumatic for the student, or vice versa. And so a lot of times I'll talk to different individuals and they say, well, I don't know why that's traumatic for this person because it's not traumatic for me. So trauma is all about perception. When an individual experiences a traumatic event or a trauma stressor, basically what happens is that their prefrontal cortex takes a backseat. So the prefrontal cortex, that's where all of our rational thinking comes from. That's where we're able to regulate our emotions. We're able to make rational decisions. We're able to think through our behavior. However, when a person is experiencing that trauma stressor, then the amygdala takes over. And so basically what you're looking at is the difference between rational brain and emotional brain, okay? Rational brain says, I need to take a step back. I need to think about my behavior, think about what the consequences are going to be, and then make a decision. Emotional brain says, I'm in survival mode. I need to do whatever possible to make myself feel safe or to eliminate this threat. So this will come into play later when we talk about strategies. Next slide, please. Okay, so how does trauma show up in our students? Most times this can look at behavioral problems, learning deficits, emotional outbursts. Students can have difficulty controlling their emotions. mainly because they lack emotional regulation skills and coping. They may have difficulty sleeping, difficulty eating. They may have difficulty answering questions. You may see a decline in their grades in school, or even their engagement in school. You may see social withdrawal or aggression, poor impulse control, risk taking. So if students are starting to engage in like substance abuse behavior, or even bullying, may be indicative of having experienced a traumatic event. You may also see depression, anxiety, negative self-image, as I said before, increased suicidal ideation, detachment from peer relationships or even relationships with family members. If you have a student that normally says hello to you every day and all of a sudden they're not speaking to you, this may be indicative that they're having difficulty regulating from experiencing a trauma stressor or a trauma event. Next slide, please. So these are just some common trauma reactions that you may see in students. The biggest one that I see in students in adolescence is I see a lot of the self-harm behavior and the suicidal ideation, also in risk-taking behavior. And that risk-taking behavior can vary. So whether it's engaging in substance abuse or promiscuity, skipping classes, just outright what we would typically call rebellious behavior, engaging in illegal activity, even changes in peer groups, that kind of thing. So those are some things that we may see: become withdrawn, fixated on safety, and even having nightmares and difficulty concentrating. Next slide, please. So these are what teachers may see in classrooms: difficulty paying attention in learning, trouble rebuilding relationships with teachers and peers, more time out of class. So if you notice that you have students that are skipping school or simply not coming to school, and that wasn't a problem before, if their test scores or their grades are starting to fail and they were an A student before, at least a C student before, increase in suspensions or expulsion, and then high rates of referral to special education. Now, referral to special education is not necessarily a negative thing, and we'll get to that when we talk about strategies. Okay, so best practices for trauma-informed care within schools. So one of the things that I want to talk about first, and this is where I like to spend most of my time, is I like to talk about the foundations of trauma-informed care. So I'd like you to take a brief moment, and I'd like you to think about your school environment. And just thinking about when you have students that are demonstrating behavioral issues or learning difficulties, what is the school's response to that? And the reason why I asked that question is because one of the things that we have to think about when we're talking about implementing trauma-informed care in the school system is really we have to do a deep evaluation and reflection of our practices in our school environment. We have to look at what are some ways in which the environment and our practices can actually be trauma stressors or re-traumatizing for the students. So Foundations of Trauma Care, we look at Sandra Bloom and her 4 pillars of knowledge in her sanctuary model. So if you have an opportunity to read, her book is called Creating Sanctuary, and it's all about how she developed a trauma-informed care model with young people. So first and foremost, as we talked about earlier, you have to look at the psychobiology of trauma. So what the trauma does to the brain and how that looks outwardly, the outwardly expression in terms of cognition and behavior and emotional dysregulation. An active creation of nonviolent environments, principles of social learning, and understanding the ways in which complex adaptive systems grow, change, and alter their course. And so this is that reflection piece and that evaluation piece of your school systems. What are some of our practices when we talk about discipline or referrals to mental health or referrals to school counselors, changing courses, changing teachers, those kinds of things, and how that can impact the student emotionally and mentally. So SAMHSA has their guiding principles of trauma-informed care. The first one is safety. So you're looking at, how does my environment ensure the physical and emotional safety of each and every student? Transparency. How are my processes and procedures clear, consistent, and maintain boundaries between students and between students and staff? Enhancing peer support. So peer support and self-help services that provide safety and hope to the student and also to the staff. So even though we're talking about trauma-informed practices with students, you also need to look at how does this help your staff? Because believe it or not, staff members can also experience vicarious trauma just by hearing the stories of students that they go through, or just their own traumatic experiences. Collaboration. How do you partner with schools, staff, and students for the mutual sharing of power? So we're looking at, how do you use your authority within the school system when you're working with students and staff? Empowerment. Client-centered shared decision-making, choice, and goal setting for the promotion of self-advocacy and recovery. So our students and staff being able to have the opportunity to voice their concerns and their needs. There are multiple choices being made available to them. And how are you working together to set goal setting? So if the goal is graduation, then how are you and the student working together to attain that goal of the student graduating on time? If the goal is for the student to go to college or a vocational program, then how are you mutually setting those goals and working towards those goals? And then awareness of cultural, historical, and gender-based trauma, providing services with consideration for the gender, cultural, and particular circumstances of each client or student. So the original ACEs questionnaire does not really account for cultural, historical, and gender-based trauma. So these are just some extra considerations that you'll have to take in place. So again, your students who may be LGBTQIA+, your students who may be undocumented or have refugee status, and then your BIPOC students. So the TIC components that you're looking to implement in your strategies is, again, that safety. So the physical safety of the environment of the school, and also how your school environment encourages emotional safety. Boundaries and consistency and clarity in order to gain trustworthiness between you, the students, and the staff. Choice, does each individual have choice and control to make those choices? Collaboration, shared decision-making power, even if you're in a place of authority. And empowerment and skill building. Next slide, please. So how do we get to a place of where our environment and our school systems are trauma-informed care? And it really starts with cognitive reframing. So trauma-informed care looks at what happened to you versus what's wrong with you. So that's the question that we're asking. When we look at a student's behavior and their emotional response, when their grades are failing, when they're not coming to school, when they have belligerent behavior, when they're not doing any work at all, instead of asking what's wrong with you, we really want to look at what's happening with the student that is this kind of leading to this behavior. So the next few slides, we're going to talk about how do we create this environment of trauma-informed care within the schools. And the biggest goal is creating a collaborative environment and standards of practice for emotional dysregulation. So really what we need to do is we need to start looking at these behaviors and cognitive issues and learning disabilities as really emotional dysregulation. Most of the time, the language in schools is that this is a bad kid, this is bad behavior, the student doesn't care, the parents don't care. But if we change our mindset, right, then we're really working to come alongside the student and the family and the staff to help the student be successful. So the very first thing I know I said was before is that you need to kind of evaluate your school environment and all of your practices and your procedures. The next thing is you're going to need for staff development. So that's training all school personnel. So that's training your nutritional staff. That's your deans, your APs, your principals. This is training also your paras, your school counselors, your school social workers, all of your teachers, and any individual who may come in contact with that student. So if you even have mentors and volunteers that are coming onto school grounds and are working with the students, then they should also get a training as well into trauma-informed care. Some of the things that you want to train everyone on is, of course, you want to train them on the neurobiology of trauma and trauma-informed care principles. The reason why this is important is because I'm a huge proponent of psychoeducation. And when you're training individuals on the neurobiology of trauma, what you're really shedding light on is like, this is a normal response. So we're normalizing emotional dysregulation. And what that does is it helps students and individuals to not internalize their emotional dysregulation as simply bad behavior or that there's something wrong with me. So the neurobiology of trauma really teaches us that there's really a rewiring of the brain that happens when an individual experiences one or multiple traumatic events. So it's not to discount that an individual is not responsible for their behavior. There's still that level of responsibility. But when you teach about the neurobiology of trauma, you're also giving them insight and helping them gain awareness of, okay, how is this trauma showing up in my behavior and my thought process? And then also training them on trauma-informed care principles. So what does that safety look like? What does that collaboration, that empowerment, and that trustworthiness look like? How do we build that among students and staff? How do we get students to trust us? How do we get parents to trust us? How do we get them to trust the staff versus viewing the staff as just somebody that's against them or doesn't care about them? Recognizing trauma stressors and trauma reactions. So again, looking at your school environment and your own behavior as to how could I potentially be creating a trauma stressor in this individual. Trauma stressors, what are typically known as triggers, are connected to our five senses. And so sometimes the individual doesn't even recognize what the trauma stressor is. And so you as the individual that's encountering this person that's emotionally dysregulated, asking those questions, what about our exchange right now is causing you to feel stressed out or causing the reaction that you're experiencing right now? Because what typically sometimes happens is that the student is experiencing a trauma stressor, so they're yelling or they're being rude or what's considered disrespectful. And then the staff member also is triggered and goes into survival mode. So when you have two people who are in survival mode interacting with each other, right, that's not a healthy interaction and nothing's going to get done. Also being aware of trauma reactions. Right. So again, going back to those signs and symptoms of trauma, how could this student's behavior actually be a trauma reaction? So if they all of a sudden get out of their seat and they start yelling, changing that mindset, okay, they're not trying to be rude or disruptive. Could this be a trauma reaction? Could I have unintentionally created a trauma stressor in this environment for the student? And then also teaching self-care strategies to reduce vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue, and burnout among all staff. So if a student is trusting a staff member to tell them what's going on at home, how do we help that staff member not experience the side effects of hearing those traumatic stories? Next is creating a safe and supportive environment. So we're looking at using respectful language and tone in general, so among staff members and also with students and parents. Setting and enforcing clear, consistent expectations and boundaries. So when a student has this particular behavior, or they come into the classroom, or they come into your office, are your expectations and your boundaries the same, or are your boundaries inconsistent? Consistency and with boundaries is important because, again, it creates that sense of safety. I know exactly what's going to happen when I go to so-and-so's office. I know exactly what the outcome is going to be. I know exactly how they're going to treat me, how they're going to talk to me. I know what the next step is going to be. Establishing clear routines as well. And so, things happen. Sometimes you have to be out of the office. Teachers have to be out of the classroom, but explaining to students when there's going to be a break in those routines, because again, routines create that sense of safety. Providing students with the opportunity for choice and control. So asking students that question, what do they hope the outcome will be? What do they feel is going to be the best outcome for them in the context of what's happening? So again, not necessarily saying that the student is not responsible for their behavior and there won't be consequences, but also ensuring that those consequences aren't going to be re-traumatizing. So that's even looking at, for example, if you decide to expel a student. If you expel a student and they're not going to be at home, then what are they going to be continued to be exposed to at home? So are there trauma stressors or trauma events that are still going to lead to more and more increased emotional dysregulation? Providing an option for students to calm down, relax, and regulate their emotions. So I know typically this is seen in elementary schools, but I also highly recommend it in secondary education as well. And this is where you have a room on campus or an office on campus where a student has the opportunity to calm down and relax. You have a higher chance of being successful in engaging with this student if the student has an opportunity to regulate their emotions. Again, understanding that emotional dysregulation is emotional brain. So that student is in survival mode, or that staff member is in survival mode. And so there's no way that they can make a rational decision or have a rational conversation once they're in that mode. So some things that can go into this office or this room to help, students or staff calm down is that you can have a yoga mat. You can have different postings on the wall that help them to do deep breathing or meditation exercises. You can have coloring pages, and it sounds like more like elementary school, but believe it or not, this helps adolescents as well. You can have a white noise machine, those kinds of things. There is also the psychology of color. So you want to be mindful of even like what color the room is painted. You want colors that invoke calm. So we're talking about yellows, greens, and blues. You want to stay away from reds and blacks and browns and really, really dark colors. Soft grays are okay if they're mixed in with like a yellow or a pink or a blue. But believe it or not, the psychology of color actually helps. You also want to, in your policies and procedures, decide like how much time does a student get to be in this space to calm down and relax? What's the procedure for a student to get to this space? So is it a special hall pass? Are you telling them to go see a specific staff member and letting that staff member know that they need to go to the calm down space? Looking and seeing based on how your campus is set up, do you need to have more than one calm space so that you don't have students walking from one end of the campus to the other? Who monitors these spaces? And being a former school social worker and a teacher, I understand that this can be a lot. It's another thing on your checklist to do, but also understanding that if you're creating a safe and supportive environment for students, then you're also creating an opportunity for them to enhance their learning. So learning can occur if a student's emotionally dysregulated. Next slide, please. Adapting your disciplinary procedures to address student responses to trauma stressors. So this is going to be a really big one. This is going to be a conversation that you're going to have with your deans and your principals and anybody else that's involved in your disciplinary process. But becoming aware of potential trauma stressors that may influence communication and collaboration with students and parents. And so just thinking about, are there other disciplinary consequences we can implement that may not be a trauma stressor to the student? Reducing re-traumatization by implementing positive, respectful, and restorative practices. So that's having that conversation of, okay, when you return to school, this is what the environment's going to be like. So instead of treating the student as a constant problem child, do they have the opportunity within the context of engaging with students, faculty, staff, to come back to positive and respectful engagement, right? Or so is it always this, I'm looking at you, I'm watching your behavior, and not really having this opportunity to start over. Developing procedures for ensuring confidentiality in the sharing of information. So even when you have a student where you have to engage in disciplinary practices, who all is privy to that information? Is it every single teacher? Does every single school counselor know? Does every single dean aware of what's going on with the student? So really limiting the information to those who are directly involved with the student and involved with the processes regarding that student's disciplinary process. This is a huge, huge one. Distinguishing between the need for disciplinary action and referral for mental health services. And so if we look at behavior as emotional dysregulation, then does the student necessarily need to be suspended or expelled, or do they need more intensive mental health services? What is the process that we're going to put in place if the parent does not agree with the referral for mental health services? Does the parent and student have access to mental health services? Those kinds of things. So that leads us to number 4, which is really collaborating with school mental health professionals to develop and implement assessment and intervention tools as part of the disciplinary process. So working very closely with your school social worker, your school psychologist, your mental health facilitators, finding out if you as a school counselor are able to give the ACE assessment or the pediatric ACEs. What's the referral process if a student needs to see the psychologist or the social worker, or needs a referral outside of the school system? How many times can that person meet with the student before they have to be referred outside of the school? Does the parent have health insurance? Do we need to look at accessibility? So do you have relationships with outside providers who are willing to come into the schools and meet with the student at the school if the parent lacks transportation? And what does that referral process look like? Is everybody on your team aware of that referral process? Is everybody utilizing the same referral process? And as part of that referral process, what happens when the student returns to school? So is there also a follow-up, and what does that follow-up look like? And again, going back to the confidentiality and sharing of information, we want to ensure that we're also reducing stigma, and we're not creating shame or creating another trauma stressor because the student is in need of mental health services. Next slide, please. So this graphic just really kind of demonstrates your system of support that you could implement in schools. And so really primary prevention is really creating the trauma-informed practices in school, promoting staff wellness and addressing stress, burnout, and vicarious trauma, looking at how your systems and your policies and procedures are trauma-informed, they're safe and they're supportive, they're reducing trauma stressors, they're culturally responsive, and they initiate restorative practices. Looking at also how services are equitable. So is it the same process for each and every student? If it's not the same process for each and every student, then what is the difference and what creates the difference? So that goes back to that clarity as far as like our task and that collaboration. How are we working with the parents to see what's going to be the best outcome for the student? The goal is for the student to be successful in school and to graduate. And so when you're looking at your policies and your processes and procedures, when you're training staff, looking at how do our processes lead to this goal of students successfully exiting the school, for students successfully going on to the next level. So whether that's college, the workforce, vocational programs, or even the military. So how is all of that trauma informed, and not just for the support of the student, but also for the support of the staff and for the support of the entire school environment? Next slide. So I did list all of the references. So if you're hoping to give this presentation at your schools, all of these references have additional material that you can utilize to train, resources that you can give to your staff, to your students, to your principals. If you need help with revising your procedures, some of these references actually have guidelines on how to do that. Thank you.
Awesome, awesome. And I'm sorry, I was going through the references a little faster, but I do want you all to see it's 2 pages of references. So this is awesome. Thank you so much, Nakita. Excellent job. I have a page full of notes and nuggets. I was clicking the clicker and also taking notes, but someone asked a great question in the chat already. Will they be able to have a copy of your PowerPoint?
Absolutely. Just tell me how to send it to you to send to them. I can email it to you, Monique, to give to them. But yeah, absolutely. And feel free to alter it and change it to fit your school or your presentation needs. I have no problem with that.
Awesome. Awesome. You got me rethinking now, making a safe space that calm down, relax, and how to help others regulate emotions. I'm super excited now to do some redecorating.
Well, you think about it, like, what do we as adults do at the end of our day when we're stressed, right? Yes. We put on our, our fuzzy slippers, we get our favorite cup of tea or coffee, we put on our favorite show, and we have those moments to kind of breathe, right, and recenter. So the question that you're really asking is, do our students have the ability to do the same thing in order to re-engage in the classroom, in order to have those conversations? So just as we as adults have the ability to emotionally regulate after a stressful day, what we're saying is implementing that within the school day for students who are emotionally dysregulated.
Absolutely. Great nugget. Another thing I really liked that you touched on was making sure the entire staff was trained and well aware of the procedures in place and how to help students. A lot of times I feel like the weight of the world is on the school counselors or the social workers or the psychologists, but it needs to be everyone involved to understand what that looks like, right? So I appreciate you talking about that as well.
Yeah, and if you look at, like, there was a film that came out, Paper Tigers. It was the first trauma-informed film. First time I heard about trauma-informed care, and that was one of the things that if you look at that video again, is that all of their staff is engaged in trauma-informed care. And so when we're talking about creating a trauma-informed environment in the school system, it needs to be each and every single person that's connected to that school. So we're also talking about, like I said, your nutrition staff, your deans, your teachers, your volunteers, your mentors. But you can also use this as an opportunity to teach students and parents too, because this is not like a wide known thing, right? So in the professional realm, we are talking about trauma-informed care and trauma-informed practices. But I was just at a meeting yesterday and we were talking about health literacy in the community. And so if you approach a parent and say, hey, this is what I noticed, what's going on with the student, I want to give them this assessment. And I want to talk to you about trauma-informed care, and that, you know, when you look at this assessment, give a copy to the parent and say, are any of these situations things that your child has encountered outside or inside of the school? And if there's yes, so that's the thing about the trauma assessment too, is like your responsibility is not to interpret it. There's really no interpreting it. The score just lets you know whether or not the client has acute trauma, chronic trauma, or complex trauma. Right. So if they have complex trauma, I highly recommend that they be referred to mental health as soon as possible. But it also helps the parent to gain some insight too, to say, okay, I was wondering why all of a sudden my teenager seems like an alien and I have no idea what's going on. Perhaps they've experienced a trauma stressor. You know, you can give it to the student and have them take it and say, okay, you know, do you have permission to share this with your parent, and to let your parent know that these are things that you're saying are traumatic events for you, you know, and then even opening up the conversation now between student, parent, and school staff. So now you have that even bigger collaborative piece where it's not just you and the parent or you and the student, but now it's you and the family as a school system working together to help the student emotionally regulate and be successful in the school environment.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nakita. We really appreciate it. I actually don't see any more questions in the chat, so I guess you did a phenomenal job. There are no questions. So thank you again for being here this morning. And just as a reminder, you all will be able to receive a copy of this presentation, and you'll be able to share it as well, these resources. So thank you again, Nakita.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So as we prepare for our next presenter, Mr. Pete Hernandez, he's going to talk a little bit about some updates from the Office of Student Financial Assistance. I just wanted to remind you, I know that Corey mentioned that if you aren't a member, we hope you become a member. But just if you didn't know, it's an awesome time for those of you who are at public high schools to join SACAC if you aren't a member, because there is no cost, okay? No cost. It is free. The membership is $45, but there's no cost to you. So if you're not a member, I'm hoping that you are enjoying this session and you'll want to know more about the awesome opportunities for professional development, the various grants that we have to offer with SACAC by becoming a member. Our next presenter is Mr. Pete Hernandez. Pedro Pete Hernandez is the current Director of Outreach Services for the Florida Department of Education, Office of Student Financial Assistance, or OSFA, in charge of the federal loan portfolio, as well as the nearly 30 state of Florida scholarship and grant programs. Pedro has been with the agency in this role since 2009. Pete Hernandez graduated from Florida State University with a bachelor's degree in international affairs with an emphasis in economics. He has over 20 years of financial aid expertise and experience. His industry tenure started as a college work-study student at Florida State University in the financial aid office. Throughout his experience, he has held positions as a financial aid officer, lender representative, and guarantor servicer. He also has been active in many industry organizations, such as a local and national financial aid association, FAFSA, Florida Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, Southern Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, and National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, and the Florida Association of Post-Secondary Schools and Colleges. I am excited to welcome, I feel like a friend to all of us, Mr. Pete Hernandez, to the floor to give us our second presentation, which is a financial aid overview. Pete, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Monique. Greatly, and always want to say thank you to all the counselors, all the mentors out there. We do what we absolutely can with all the resources that we have. We absolutely stretch them to the ultimate limits. So that's why we always want to say thank you to the counselors and mentors. With that in mind, I want to be brief for this presentation. In preparing this presentation, I was thinking, wow, we are only dealing with high school seniors for the 22-23 high school class, but we're also already dealing with the high school juniors. That means the 23-24 high school graduating class. and they're going to be seniors starting their senior year in just 5 months. And in 7 months, they're going to already be talking about financial aid, college admissions, and all of that. So what I've done is I made this presentation exactly for next year's high school seniors, because it involves a lot of changes. It is going to be one of the drastic years in financial aid, but I wanted you to be aware of what's coming down the pipeline, but at the same time, outline it with what is valuable and important information to share with this year's high school seniors. So with that in mind, once again, remember, this is geared for the 23-24 high school students, but the 24-25 academic year. So one of the first things is financial aid has its own language and its own acronyms. One of the biggest things is next year, students are not going to be qualified on an EFC or an estimated family contribution. They are going to be dealing with what's called an SAI, or Student Aid Index. So that's very important, along with all the other acronyms. So just have that in mind. Now, this begins once again for next year's seniors, that is the 23-24 high school class, but it's for the 24-25 academic or post-secondary year. But just be aware, it is a significant difference, and I'll go through the process of explaining that throughout this presentation. Next slide. So what are we going to cover today? Once again, we're always going to review what is financial aid, where do you apply for financial aid, when and how to apply, and who can actually help you with the financial aid process for your students. Next slide. When it comes to financial aid, we always want to get the point across that financial aid is any and all money from all 4 major sources. That is, whether it's from the federal government, that is Pell Grants, student loans, whether it's from the state of Florida, whether that's merit-based scholarships or need-based scholarships or special interests, it is all considered financial aid. Institutional funds, whether it's academic scholarship, whether it's a sports scholarship, music scholarship, any funds coming from the institution are also considered financial aid, and any private scholarships, they're all considered financial aid for the students when it comes to going to the post-secondary institution. So we always have those students or those parents that say, you know what, I don't qualify for financial aid, my parents or we make too much. But financial aid is beyond that. It is all money, federal, state, institutional, and private. For example, the Florida Bright Future Scholarship, it is a private merit-based scholarship. I mean, state scholarship, not a private, I'm sorry. It is a state merit-based scholarship. It is also considered financial aid. So just want to make sure that everyone understands, it gets into the concept of when they talk about financial aid, is it any financial aid? So whether that's gift aid, self-help, need-based, or merit-based, it is all financial aid. Next slide. Now, there's all sorts of things called the cost of attendance. That's how you determine financial aid, and that's going to vary from one institution to another institution. Also, the cost of attendance is going to vary whether it's an in-state student or out-of-state student, whether that student is living off campus or off campus. And that cost of attendance is made up of 2 major components, the direct cost and an indirect cost. But in order to inform students, every institution, every post-secondary institution is required to have what's called the net price calculator. That net price calculator will give the student a very, very approximate cost of what it's going to cost that student to attend that institution. So if your students are looking at getting into a certain school at this point, or researching schools for next year, or those very active students are looking for way down the line, have them look at their net price calculator to see how much would it cost them, particularly to go to a certain institution. And that is a resource tool that every institution has. It's either on their website, on their financial aid webpage, or on their main site. But every school is required to have this net price calculator. Next slide. Now, there's the biggest thing when it comes to cost associated with an overall cost of attendance. The biggest difference is going to be the actual direct cost, or what most people determine as tuition and fees. Here, according to the College Board, we have these figures. Approximately, to go to a state public institute, a 2-year institution, or what they would call a community college, nationally, it'd be about $3,700. In the state of Florida, it's less than $3,000. If you were to go to a public 4-year institutions, for example, in the state of Florida, that would be our 12 state public universities. In the state of Florida, they're about $6,000 to $7,000 in just tuition and fees, whereas nationally that figure is about 10,000. When it comes to students going out of state, if they go to an out-of-state institution, that tuition and fee figure jumps up to $27,000. And on average, whether it's nationally or in the state of Florida, private institutions, that is private not-for-profit institutions, such as your Rollins College, your University of Tampa, those institutions would figure about $37,000 in just tuition and applicable fees. Next slide. So how do we advise them to apply or process their financial aid? There are several applications. First one is the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA. Remember, this is one that the student, it is not mandated, but if the student wishes to be evaluated for all federal, state, and institutional financial aid, we recommend that they submit this application as soon as possible. Now, in the state of Florida, for high school seniors, we recommend every high school senior to apply to the Florida Financial Aid Application, or the FFAA. By applying to both the FAFSA and the Florida Financial Aid Application, it ensures that student that they are absolutely going to be considered for every federal fund, every state fund, and every institutional fund. So that's why we recommend it too. The Florida Financial Aid Application is a one-time application that students fill out their senior year. Anytime after that, by filling out the FAFSA, they will be evaluated for all federal, state, and institutional financial aid. Now, for those high school students who are going to selective institutions, if their school requires them to fill out the CSS profile or the College Scholarship Services profile, have them complete that application. That is, for example, if they're going to University of Miami, Yale, Harvard, those institutions that require the CSS profile, have them complete it, because that is how, in addition to those institutions reviewing their federal financial aid, their institutional financial aid, they have additional endowments that they look at and they award students. So if the school requires a CSS profile, have those students complete that profile. If any institution requires a separate institutional application, have them complete that. And then private scholarship applications. When it comes to private scholarships, you know, those are special donors given to students, whether they're at that school, whether they're in state, out of state. Those monies normally can and do travel out of state. It's based on the donor's criteria. So once again, the FAFSA, the Florida Financial Aid Application, the CSS profile if it's required, institutional applications as they're required, and private applications are for absolutely for everybody, including high school juniors. Because what we tell all high school juniors, at the end of this year, the very last day, the next day, you're considered a high school senior. So start applying for private scholarships as soon as you possibly can. Next slide. Once again, the free application for federal student aid, it is once again annually determined. It used to open up on October 1st every single year. For the 24-25 FAFSA that used to open on October 1st, that is not the case for next year's students. That date has yet to be determined. We were given guidance by the Department of Education that they are not committing to the October 1st deadline. I'm sorry, October 1st opening date, which they had always done that. Because FAFSA is going through a simplification and it's going to drastically change, they have not told us when that actual application is going to open. Now, the backstop that they have legislatively is January 1st. But once again, it used to open for high school seniors, for next year's high school seniors. Remember, this is next year's high school seniors. It used to open on October 1st. It is no longer going to, at this time, it is not committed to opening it up on October 1st. But the date it might open up, the last day possible, is January 1st of 2024. So just make sure that you are aware of that. We will provide additional information as soon as we get it in terms of how the application is changing and when the application is going to be available. But as of today, that date has not been determined. Next slide, please. So here's what the FAFSA.gov website is going to look like. It has a help center. So when all students want information on how to complete that, this application is user-friendly, it's intuitive. And if not, that it has a help option available. As you see to the right of that, there's an English and Spanish translation. Students can change it to either language. Next slide. A lot of information to gather, but remember, this is based on old FAFSA. The new FAFSA is due to FAFSA simplification can change, but if it doesn't, it's going to revert back to all the prior criteria. It's going to be based on state and institutional deadlines. It's going to be on the dependency status versus the independent status. That's going to be determined by the FAFSA and by U.S. Department of Education codes. And then whether it's the new FAFSA or the redesigned FAFSA, the simplified FAFSA, you're still going to have a FSA ID and an FSA, which is an FSA ID and password to actually sign this application. So that is still going to be required not only of this year's high school students and those going on to summer school, but the ones for next year as well. And we'll provide information on when they could actually obtain a FAFSA ID and password for next year's class. Next slide, please. Now remember, these are all the slides in the past. We're not going to go over them in detail, but these are all the questions that if any student for this year's high school seniors or during the summer, if they were to answer yes to any of these questions, they would be considered an independent student. Now, let's quickly review. We do have time. That's basically if they were born before January 1st of 2001. As of today, are they married? As of next year, the 24-25 year, will they be enrolling in a graduate program? Are they on active duty on the U.S. military services, or are they a veteran of the armed forces? Next slide. Will they have children? Do they have other dependents? If at any time after the age of 13, were both of their parents deceased, or are they awarded the court? Next slide. And then as determined, are you an emancipated minor, or does anyone have legal guardianship of the student? Now, legal guardianship is legal guardianship. It's not just permission for any individual to pick up a student from class or from school. It is if they have a legal, that means a court order document that says that parent or that entity has a legal guardianship over that student. Or the next slide, please. Whether it is a school district, a U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, or a private or traditional living program. As you know, every district has a homeless liaison, or a U.S. Department of Education, or district, or private institution. If they provide documentation that that student is homeless or at risk of being homeless, that student is automatically considered an independent student, just like if they would have answered any of the following questions affirmatively. That means if they answered yes to any one of those questions, they are by default considered an independent student. However, remember, this is the definitions for this year. They could change for next year, but if they don't, they're going to revert back to this same information. Next slide, please. Now, who is a parent? Once again, for parent purposes, for this year, it is only a biological or an adoptive parent. So that means grandparents, foster parents, legal guardians, older brothers and sisters, they are not considered parents for FAFSA purposes. Once again, this is under review for the next or simplified FAFSA for next year. The ability of who is a parent for FAFSA purposes can change and will more than likely change. So we will be providing that information shortly. We don't have all the details, therefore we cannot provide you that information. But just to let you know, this is how it is, but it's going to drastically change for next year. Next slide. Marital status. When it comes to this year's seniors, if the student's parents have never been married, but they live at separate locations, that means the student is only going to utilize for FAFSA information, the parent that they live with for the last 6 months, and that's going to be the determinant. If they aren't married but living together, yes, then both of those parents count for FAFSA purposes. If they are married, whether it's a traditional marriage or same-sex marriage, it is counted as married for FAFSA purposes. Now, this is important. When it comes to students, if they have either divorced or separated parents and they are living in separate locations, it is only the biological parent that the student has lived with for the last 6 months in the last either academic or calendar year. Now, however, in that scenario, if that parent's biological parent has been separated or divorced and they have remarried, yes, then the step parent does count for FAFSA purposes. If the parent is widowed, communicate with your institution's financial aid office. That means fill out your FAFSA, then contact the school's financial aid office where you're planning to attend to see how they want to handle a widowed parent from this point forward. Next slide. Then they're going to get a student aid report. And as of this year, of course, this matters because the cost of attendance minus the EFC is that's how schools determine the student's net financial need or total financial need. That's why it's important to submit and qualify for the FAFSA, because it determines a student's net financial need, and therefore the schools can award federal, state, institutional financial aid. Next slide. If this is not a perfect process by any means, and especially going after the pandemic, if the student has any kind of special circumstances where they lost a parent is unemployed, underemployed, going through any financial hardship, that is addressed at the individual schools through a process called either professional judgment or special circumstances. In those scenarios, have the student complete the FAFSA, then speak with each and every one of the schools that the student is looking at attending and their financial aid office to either go through special circumstances or professional judgment. This is how the schools have the right to actually change the scenario or different data elements on the FAFSA to actually award the student based on real life events and not based on prior year as it is set up right now. Next slide. Now, remember, when it comes to the awarding process, students are going to be awarded based on the following formula: cost of attendance minus EFC or the NEO SAI or student aid index. That is their net financial need. Then schools are going to start awarding all the scholarships and grants, whether they're from the federal, state, or institutional. And then they're going to apply any 529 or Florida prepaid plans, or it could be vice versa. It depends on the schools, but that's typically how this formula works. Cost of attendance minus EFC or SAI equals the net financial need. Then either Florida prepay or the scholarships and grants, and then student loans. And they award the student loans in the following manner: subsidized, unsubsidized, and parent loans, and then private loans, depending if they still need money that's money needed in that financial formula. So if you take the student's cost of attendance minus EFC, then go through all the grants, scholarships, Florida prepaid plans if they have any, student loans, subsidized, unsubsidized, parent loans. That's how the awarding process works. Because you always get a lot of the questions that are like, what if can I get too many grants? If you get enough money to cover the cost of attendance minus EFC, that's a wonderful problem to have. But a lot of the students, a lot of the parents are not going to get all that money. So no, it's not going to hurt them. And how this formula works, the first thing that they subtract is from the bottom up. So if the student gets a lot of information that their actual award is over the cost of attendance minus EFC, they're going to subtract the parent loan, unsubsidized loan, or subsidized loan first and foremost before they subtract any scholarships or grants. That's how the financial aid process works, and that's how the awarding formula works at a majority of all institutions. Next slide. The Florida financial aid application, that is scheduled to open up October 1st of next year for those seniors. It is the one for 22-23. For this year's seniors, it is still open. It's going to remain open up until August 30th, but have those seniors complete that application as soon as possible. Next slide. This is where the students would go. Next slide. It's our website. Now, these are all of our need-based programs, tuition assistance programs. Next slide. And of course, our merit-based programs, which are Bright Futures and our Benequisto Scholarship. Next slide. And these are all other scholarships and grants, including the one that was brand new, the 21-22, which was a Randolph Bracy Ocoee Scholarship. That is for students specifically in the Ocoee area that are residents can qualify. And once again, by submitting the Florida financial aid application, they will be evaluated for every single one of these state scholarships and grants. Next slide. And then once again, private scholarships. We always advise the fourth major source of all financial aid is private scholarships. Have your students apply to all the private scholarships that they possibly can. Next slide. So if you just go to the very end, we have a lot of resources and we will make this presentation available. Monique can either send it to you or you can contact me. Go to the very last slide. Oh, right here. Oh, one less. So just to quickly review, when it comes to the federal application for this year, it's still in existence, but October 1st was normally the opening date for the FAFSA application. It is yet to be determined. Students can create an FSA ID and password now, but we recommend doing it October 1 or early next year so they don't lose it and they have that information in front of them. When it comes to state financial aid, October 1st of 2023, only a mere 7 months away. That will ensure students are evaluated for all state scholarships, but more importantly, the Florida Bright Futures. It is a requirement. They need to submit a Florida financial aid application to receive the Florida Bright Future scholarships. When it comes to private scholarships, apply. The CSS profile, have your high school seniors submit that as soon as possible if they haven't done so. This year's juniors, have them. If they know that they're going to go to those institutions, have them set that on their actual calendar. When does the CSS profile open up? October 1st, actually, just like the FAFSA application used to, just like the Florida financial aid application, and that is done at the College Board. And then again, if there are additional required institutional applications, please have them apply. So who can help you with the process? I am solely responsible to Monique. I am an employee of Monique. So this is my direct contact information and I am at your service. You could provide my contact information to your students, to your parents. I'll be more than happy to assist them. But also we have, through our various organizations such as FAFSA, such as FCAN, we have thousands of actual professionals willing and able to assist at the financial aid offices. Through organizations, students, parents understand the financial aid process. So with that in mind, I'll take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pete. Again, another page of nuggets. A couple of questions in the chat. First question is, how accurate are the MPCs or the net price calculators?
They vary. Some have just very generic forms, but even the very generic ones are very good because they'll ask the student, where are you from? Are you a resident of this school or not? Specific for, say, for a student that's considering going in state and out of state. It's gonna show the student the difference between an in-state and out-of-state situation. It's gonna tell the student, if you go out of state, you're not gonna receive Bright Futures, but it's gonna tell that institution in the state of Florida, yes, the Bright Futures is coming in that actual information. So it is fairly accurate. Now, is it 100% accurate? Absolutely not. Remember, even after the student fills out a FAFSA and gets an award letter, that's an estimated award notification. So once the student actually shows up on campus, that's when everything becomes absolutely valid. But net price calculators are very, very accurate. There are some that are to the dime. It almost reflects their award notifications once they actually process all financial aid forms.
Awesome. Next question. I'm gonna go ahead and answer. You stated we'll be able to share your slides, correct, Pete?
Correct. Absolutely.
Right.
You have them and you can send them or they can contact me and I'll be more than happy to send them.
So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just make sure all of the presenters sharing their slides, which I believe Noah's doing the same. I'll make sure it's attached to your follow-up email so you all can have. Okay.
And I see one question that's in Bright Future changes for 2024. Yes, in regards to our Bright Futures information, our student handbook actually has all the information for this year's high school seniors and the test scores for next year. So if you're not aware, the SAT score for the Florida Academic Scholarship is going from a 1330 to a 1340 or a 29 ACT. Once again, for the Florida Academic Scholar, this year is 1330. Next year is going to be 1340. For the Florida Medallion, it is both a 25 ACT or a 1210 SAT. And remember, please tell your students whenever they register to take the SAT or ACT test, you have to officially send those test scores to either one of the 12 public state universities or the 28 state colleges, even if they're not going there. That's how it populates the test repository, and we're able to pull those scores. They don't have to apply to those schools. They don't have to contact them. They just have to list them. By listing all of them, we could then take every one of their sittings and actually do our super scoring. We know that the SAT and ACT now have super scores available to them, but we don't get that. So we need to have every one of their sittings in order for us to do our super scoring.
Thank you, Pete. A few more questions in the chat that I see. Do we know if the October 1 release date will be reinstated after this year of changes?
No, we haven't received not only the next year's changes, the only thing we can confirm is that they have not committed to October 1st opening date, which means that more than likely it is not going to be October 1st. Now, what date it is, we're waiting to hear about it, but we know that the stop date, legally, they have to have that application open on January 1st. We know that can and may cause some complications because students want to know their financial aid package depending on schools, and with early admits, we understand that. But we want to get counselors that information as soon as possible. So if you start hearing that stuff, you can contact me. I'll provide you the latest, greatest stuff that we have.
So right now,
after this year, no, we don't have any confirmation either.
okay, so right now we're just on pause until you can get us that information, but we know at the latest it will open January 1, 2024.
Correct.
Thank you. Next question. How will the EFC and SAI differ, or is it just a name change?
It's a drastic change. It's completely changed. The EFC was a benchmark that went from 0 all the way up. SAI, the Student Aid Index, allows the SAI index to have negative numbers. So we would have, for example, an EFC, or say student was going to University of Central Florida. Cost of attendance for an in-state resident at USF or any of the 12 state universities is approximately $23,000. So let's say the EFC came in as $1,000, 23,000 minus 1,000, that student's net financial need would be $22,000. Easy to calculate, go through the figure. Now, the SAI, because it has a negative figure, or it could be a negative figure, they don't know exactly how it's going to calculate when it comes to $23,000 minus a negative EFC, if it's, even beyond that. We haven't gotten the details from the Department of Education, so schools cannot adjust their information that way. In the past, another difference is, for example, EFC is 0, is an estimated family contribution of 0 would automatically mean the Pell Grant would be the maximum amount. Schools would be able to package that or estimate that in the award letters. Now, we don't know exactly how much negative to 0, or what is the criteria for a maximum Pell Grant. So that is what we're awaiting from the U.S. Department of Education on. And it's significant difference. It's significant difference on who is a parent for FAFSA purposes as well. There's going to be very few questions, but at the same time, who is responsible for FAFSA and what are the process to fill out that FAFSA application. That's why I kind of went in, this is what it is, this is what it's going to, but worst case scenario, we'll still revert back to the old way. And that could be a possibility, or it may not so, but we're still in that process at this point.
And Pete, that kind of goes into this last question. You might have seen it already. What change is expected in FAFSA about the parent who provides the financial support?
Right. As indicated in the presentation, normally right now we know which parent is to be used for FAFSA purposes. In the future, it can be both biological parents, whether they're living at the same address or whether they're divorced parents. Both biological parents could be required to fill out a FAFSA ID and do the income tax, IRS data retrieval for both parents, whether they're divorced or not. So it could be significant changes, but we don't know all the details as of yet.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions that I see in the chat. I'm looking now. Awesome job, Pete. Thank you for such valuable information. You joined us last year and we had to bring you back because there was just such great information and it's forever changing, right? So it's always good to be in the know. I really appreciate you presenting that information and sharing what you knew at this time, especially as we prepare for those juniors to transition. It was extremely helpful. I just want to add one thing I had to learn coming from another state. I'm from Georgia, was here in Florida, a lot of times they call the Florida financial aid application the Bright Futures application, but to be reminded that there are so many other state grants and scholarships that students can be eligible for, but that first stop is the Florida financial aid application, and Bright Futures is under that umbrella. So as counselors, just making sure that we're also changing the language. It's hard to just not say Bright Futures application, but try to get into practice with family and with the community that this is the Florida financial aid application, because there are so many other state grants and scholarships that are available beyond Bright Futures. So thank you so much, Pete.
Always at your service. So you guys have my contact information, and trust me, it rings on my office and I'll be more than happy to assist anybody.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay. While you guys are taking a stretch break, we are going to head into our last session. Before we go into our last session, you know, we talked about the grants and opportunities for our students, but I want to remind you, if you didn't know, that there's grant opportunities for counselors who are involved in SACAC. So I didn't put it on the slide, but there's what's called CPF, the Counselor Participation Fund, and that's a professional development opportunity, a grant opportunity for counselors only to apply for. And that allows you to be able to apply for funding to attend the annual SACAC conference, which is in April this year and in Jacksonville. So I didn't put it on the slide. I put just a little snippet because you'll get a copy of the presentation, but I didn't put much information because it's closed. But just be in mind, because I know everyone's going to become a member if you aren't already, that next year, if there's a budget issue and you want to attend SACAC, that you can apply for the CPF or the Counselor Participation Fund. In addition, there is now open the Extending the Dream Professional Grant, which this is just a way for you to be able to receive assistance in a program, particularly a college and career planning or program that you may be interested in implementing at your school or in the community, and it is open now. Grants usually range from about $300 to $3,700. It just depends. They're asking you for basic information, details about your program that you're interested in getting funding for. And that's just a great way to get some assistance in the programs that you may want to implement. So just wanted to share that nugget, and we are going to get ready to transition into our final session for today. So as many of you know, I know a lot of emails have gone out, the memos have been shared. The Florida Department of Education has announced their new statewide contract, which is with Xello. Is one of the leading college and career readiness platforms, and beginning in the fall of 2023, all of the districts in Florida will have access at no cost to the full suite of the K-12 tools for career exploration and planning. It also includes work-based learning coordination to support the delivery of on-job training, apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship, and internship opportunities. So I was excited to chat with Noah, to invite her to come on and to just kind of give you guys a brief overview if you haven't attended one of their sessions in February, if you haven't really read a lot about Xello. This will give you the opportunity to see what it's like. And especially if your district is interested in transitioning to Xello, this would be a great opportunity. So a little bit about Noah. Noah Lipton began her career journey as a social worker with the YMCA, supporting youth with the challenge of discovering their future goals. It was during this time that Noah became acquainted with Xello and observed the power and influence an interactive online platform can have. This experience led Noah to pursue a career at Xello, where she continues to share her passion for inspiring and encouraging youth. Throughout her 12 years at Xello, Noah has successfully guided hundreds of clients across North America to best implement and utilize Xello's tools to promote students' successful futures. She is excited and looking forward to supporting educators across Florida to ensure a smooth and successful transition to Xello. So without further ado, I'm excited to turn the floor over to Noah and for her to introduce Xello to all of the Florida school counselors here today. The floor is yours, Noah.
Thank you so much, Monique. And thank you for inviting me to today's session. I'm very excited to review Xello with you all and very much looking forward to implementing Xello at districts across Florida. A quick agenda of what we'll cover today. Monique's already provided you with a quick introduction to Xello, but I'll dig a bit deeper into the platform. We'll also take a look at your Xello support team. We'll review how Xello is going to support your students, and then I'll also showcase to you all what's next and how you can get started after today's presentation. Xello is a college career life readiness platform that is designed to support Florida students. What we're seeing here is a quick overview of the features that are included in Xello. Xello incorporates career development and planning for students beginning in kindergarten, moving all the way up to grade 12. That includes built-in curriculum or lessons for students. It includes exploration pieces for students to better understand who they are and how that fits into their future goals. Xello also incorporates a full 4-year course planning tool so that students can plan out their courses for grade 9 and beyond. Included in Xello is also a work-based learning exploration tool as well. This allows students to review local companies within their community that are offering opportunities to students. Students will have the ability to filter based on their interests, based on the type of opportunity that they'd like to pursue, and also be able to request the directly within Xello. Just going back one more slide, Monique. Other features in Xello also include our college readiness tools. And of course, following Pete's presentation, I wanted to highlight that Xello has a built-in local scholarships feature where students can explore scholarships, find out all the details about the scholarship, link to the scholarship application form, and even note within Xello that they have applied to or received a scholarship. Xello also incorporates college application tools. Students can request letters of recommendation. Educators can action those requests, and we also have a Common App integration as well. Before we move on to the next slide, I just want to highlight again the lessons and curriculum that are built into the Xello platform. We're going to dig a bit deeper into this today, but it's one of the key features that differentiate Xello from other college career life readiness platforms in this space. We provide you with unique lessons that cover a wide variety of future readiness topics. These lessons can be built into your curriculum or classroom activities. And finally, Xello also provides you with a space to connect with your parents and guardians. Xello has a separate space for parents, guardians, and family members to review the work that their children are completing within Xello. Moving on to the next slide, Monique, thanks so much. I wanted to introduce you to other team members here at Xello that are supporting with the implementation of the platform across the state. So of course, this comes with great support here at Xello. We are a company of about 200 people that spans various different continents. But here I've showcased 8 individuals here at Xello that are working very closely with the Florida Department of Education, as well as Florida Virtual Campus, and each district in the state. So as we come to the end of today's presentation, I am going to share with you a document where you can find out who your Xello Success Manager is, and you're welcome to reach out after today's presentation if you have any questions at all, or of course, if you're ready to get started with your Xello implementation. I also wanted to note that Xello has a full service client solutions team. We have 8 individuals who are sitting by the phone, consistently watching their emails and ready to answer any questions from educators, from students, from parents. So included on this slide here is also the contact information for Xello's support team as well. Next slide, please. Perfect. Thank you, Monique. So wanted to dig a bit deeper into how Xello is going to support students across Florida. What you're seeing here is a continuum, but I wanted to note that, of course, it's not always in this process that students use the platform. The platform makes it really easy for students to move from the building self-knowledge phase of the platform to exploring options, to creating a plan. Perhaps a student wants to take a step back as they're exploring the program and move back to a phase that they explored earlier on, perhaps in middle school. Often students begin in the platform by completing the interest inventories and assessments that we have built into Xello. This allows students to start thinking about who they are, what their skills include, what their interests are. We have a very popular assessment in Xello called Matchmaker. It's a career interest inventory that includes 39 questions. It only takes about 5 to 10 minutes to complete. And once students complete the Matchmaker assessment, they are provided a strength match on every career in Xello's database, which includes 600 careers. So right away, students can start understanding and digging into careers that have been matched to them. Students often progress from the building self-knowledge phase to exploring options. And this is where students can dig deeper into careers. Again, I mentioned the 600 career profiles included in Xello. Embedded within each profile is a description, a day in the life, interviews with both males and females that have experience in this career. Students can rate their interest on this career. And then, of course, students can start exploring colleges, universities, institutions, programs, work-based learning opportunities. And as the next phase, students start to build out those concrete plans for their future. That could be a high school 4-year course plan, that could be college applications, or we also have a plans and goals section as well, where students can start mapping together their next steps to achieve their plans. But of course, this comes with reassessment all along the way. And Xello's built-in lessons or curriculum is what drives that learning. It's where students can start digging in deeper and exploring careers that they're interested in, colleges that they're interested in, perhaps other pathways that they're looking to explore, such as the military or an apprenticeship after high school. On the next few slides, we're going to dig a bit deeper into the different experiences that students have in our K-2 platform. So we have a platform for kindergarten to grade 2 students. Then students progress to our grades 3 to 5 platform. And then, of course, we have our platform for middle and high school students that spans from grade 6 to grade 12. Beginning in kindergarten to grade 2, students experience a more gamified version of the platform where they're exploring 6 different pathways and about 18 different careers. But again, we provide this experience in a way that students at this age level can engage with. Moving on to grades 3 to 5, we incorporate missions for students. Again, this is built-in curriculum that you can incorporate into the classroom setting. Missions include videos, they include, in some cases, cartoons, but also questions for students to answer, and also spaces for students to reflect as well. I do want to mention that all of the content at the grade 3 to 5 level is written at a grade 3 level. So all of the written content is written for students at a grade 3 reading level, and all of the content for our K to grade 5 experience can be read aloud as well. Moving on to middle and high school, we're showcasing here just a quick peek into one of the lessons that's embedded in Xello. Lessons bring in save schools, save careers, and have students further reflect on those choices. Moving on to the next slide, students again are building their self-knowledge within Xello. In some cases, Xello is the first space where a student is starting to think about who they are today and how that relates to who they want to be in their future. Even beginning in the K-2 experience, students are starting to think about school subjects that they like, some of the skills that they're really proud of. Moving on to grade 3 to 5, students continue to expand on that, and all the work that students do in Xello moves with them throughout the program. And then we're seeing a quick peek here in the middle and high school experience of the student's profile, where they can bring in a profile picture, a background picture, start exploring their career matches. Students can build out a full portfolio within Xello, and they're able to share that portfolio with others. Whether it's an educator at their school, a coach, an employer, a college rep, students can share all of the work that they're proud of within their Xello profile. Moving on to the next slide, I wanted to highlight a bit more about how students can explore within Xello. Again, in the K-2 experience, students start exploring 6 different pathways. They're working through smaller games within each pathway and learning about that pathway in an engaging way. As students move on to the grade 3 to 5 experience, they can start exploring 200 different careers. Within those career profiles, again, the content is written in a way that students at that grade level can engage with. And then as students move on to high school, they can start exploring our 600 different career profiles that grows and changes on a regular basis as new careers emerge and some careers become extinct. And also, of course, our thousands of school profiles, program profiles, and the work-based learning opportunities and scholarships that we work with you on embedding within the program specific for your district. Moving on to the next slide, we'll just finally showcase for you all today the planning piece within Xello. So it's even beginning at the K-2 level where students are starting to think about their interests and how that relates to their future plans. But it's in grade 3 to 5 where students can start setting shorter term goals and showcasing how they're going to start achieving those goals. But then, of course, it's when they get to middle and high school where they start building out those course plans, college applications, and more concrete goals for their future. So finally, on our next slide, I wanted to showcase that, of course, many of you have various different devices available to your students at your schools. Some of you may have devices available, some of you may not. So I wanted to show you that Xello is a program that has been built to work flawlessly on any device. With each new feature we launch, we test the program on various different devices to make sure that Xello is accessible to students no matter what device they have at their fingertips. What this also means is that students can easily access Xello from home and continue their exploration from home as well, or perhaps with the support of a parent, guardian, family member, or friend. So moving on to the next slide, I just wanted to showcase for you all our next steps. So of course, we want to get to know each and every district across Florida. We are working with each district individually on an implementation plan. We understand that each district has different needs and different priorities. You're using various different programs to support college, career, and life readiness at this time. And we want to make sure that we're finding the right plan for Xello to fit in. So we are meeting with districts all across the state on a regular basis to get to know each other. And after that initial phase of learning about you and sharing more information about Xello, we're beginning that implementation planning phase. That's when we're uncovering which features we want to focus on for the upcoming school year in regards to implementation and identifying and documenting that plan. We also want to work with your team on data integration, the setup of single sign-on to make sure that everyone can easily access the platform, and working with each district as well on your own training plan. We are, of course, offering trainings to the state as a whole. For example, we're working on an upcoming training session on how Xello can be used to meet the middle school career planning requirement. But we also want to provide each district with their own individual training based on your own individual needs. So more information on those individual training sessions coming soon as we work with your districts, but we'll also be sharing information on larger trainings that we'll be holding for the state. And finally, with the new school year just around the corner, we're hoping to launch with districts across the state coming up in September. But then, of course, we continue to support you all along the way. We showcased earlier on the team behind you here at Xello that includes our client solutions team. We're always here to answer questions and help you as you begin to dig into the platform. So before we finish up today, I'm going to pop into the chat a link for you all to review that includes the districts across the state and your associated Xello Success Manager. So you can all feel comfortable reaching out to your primary contact here at Xello to get more information. So I've just popped that there into the chat. It is a Google Doc, so feel free to click on that link to find your district name and your Xello Success Manager. I see some questions.
Yes,
oh,
I was going there next, Noah. You're right on time.
okay, perfect. Yes.
I actually see two questions in the chat, Noah. The first one is, will Xello be available to private school counselors? I assume no, but I thought I'd ask. So I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as part of the contract with the Florida Department of Ed, Xello is available at no cost to public schools and charter schools across the state. Unfortunately, the cost of Xello is not covered by the Florida Department of Education for private schools. However, we'd love to chat with you and find out if Xello would be a good fit for your school. And at that point, we can discuss pricing as well. So feel free if you are able to click on that link in the chat. You will see at the bottom of the, on page, I think it's the last page, you'll see Florida private schools, and you'll see the contact information for my colleague Yulia in that document. Feel free to reach out to Yulia to discuss Xello further if you're interested.
Awesome. I see, and I believe that answered both of those two questions. So if it did not, to the attendee who typed the second question, please retype and let us know. Do we have access now to play around with Xello? So maybe like a demo account?
Great question from anonymous attendee. So as we begin our conversations with each district, we are able to provide you with your demo access. It is actually access to your own district and school site. So again, I urge you to reach out to your success manager in the document that I provided, and we can most certainly provide you with demo access. And
I have a question. Were you going to address Ruth?
Yeah, I see Ruth
Okay.
asked that question. So I know for certain that we're working very closely with Palm Beach County on the implementation of Xello. And I believe, Ruth, that Palm Beach is there. It's just under the name School District of Palm Beach County. So I think it's alphabetical. So if you scroll down to, I think, the second last page, you'll see your district name there, and your success manager, his name is Edan, and he'd be happy to provide you with updates on our implementation progress at your district.
Okay, Ruth said, thank you. Perfect. Any more questions? I think we've answered them all, Noah, but I'm just gonna ask one more time if there are any more questions. Really appreciate the overview. Love how user-friendly it seems that Xello is. I actually have a question. I want to know if they can put in the Q&A if their district is already committed to Xello, if they already decided that you're going to go with Xello, if that's information you all are comfortable with sharing. I'm just curious, but you can put it in the Q&A if your district is already moving forward with Xello next year. Okay. All right, well, I don't see any more questions. So listen, the presenters, you all did a phenomenal job because there weren't as many questions in the Q&A today. So kudos to you all on such valuable information. Noah, you did a phenomenal job. Again, just for those that may have popped in and out, we are going to be sharing the slide deck. So you have access to the entire slide deck. There will be an email that you will receive that not only will contain resources from the training, but from the workshop, excuse me, but we're also going to provide you with the a survey that we'd love for you to complete so we know moving forward how best to serve you, what sessions you're interested in. So thank you for joining us, Noah.
Thank you, Monique, for having me here today.
Absolutely. Thank you. What a wonderful workshop today. And we are actually finishing right on time, which I need to write this down. This is quite impressive because I'm usually always going over. This is awesome. So I'm super excited to have our very own Zaire McCoy, SACAC president, to give us some closing remarks after a wonderful session today, and maybe even talk a little bit about the conference. We had some awesome nuggets from all three of our presenters, some awesome nuggets about SACAC. Don't forget about that free membership for those public school counselors that you can join us at no cost, so no coins, the different grants opportunities that are available to you, remembering about Council Participation Fund next year, but we have the grant that's open now, extending the dream for you all to apply for. Just super excited, and great things are happening in SACAC, so we want you to be a part of it. Zaire, thank you for being here. I'm gonna turn it over to you to close us out for today.
Good morning. Good morning. It's still morning for another hour here. Thank you guys so much for attending the virtual drive-in workshop for the state of Florida. For those of you who I have not had the chance to meet, my name is Zaire McCoy, as Monique was so gracious. I, in my daytime work, serve as the AVP and Dean of Admission at Rollins College in Central Florida, Winter Park specifically, so right outside of Orlando. And then I've had the honor of serving as your SACAC president for the 22-23 year. I am really excited about a lot of the things that are happening in Florida, and I hope that you know, I certainly will make some remarks about the annual conference coming up in Jacksonville, but I hope that you think about ways that you can stay engaged. And the virtual Florida Drive-In Workshop is a perfect example of maybe your dollars might not afford you the chance to get to where you want to be in person, or maybe you missed the window to apply for a Counselor Participation Fund this year. But as was mentioned, the Extend the Dream grant certainly is still available for folks to apply for. But more importantly, what are the ways in which we can leverage technology to connect with one another? So I know that if we've learned a lot of things in COVID, both positive and negative, we can lean on the positive and knowing that we can connect with one another that way. And so regardless of where you are across our state, we want to make sure that we are connecting with you, and that the SACAC board, our leadership, certainly those who are in leadership within the state of Florida, Monique being one of those state chairs for us, we're so grateful for the opportunity to engage in this way and getting the type of information that you need to have to, one, be informed, and also serve yourselves as well as the students and their families that you're working with. So obviously this work is much greater than just SACAC. So thank you for your service to your students and your communities. As is mentioned, we have an annual conference just right around the corner, a little over a month from now, in Jacksonville, Florida. You'll see the dates referenced here on the slide. We'll be at the Hyatt Regency Jacksonville Riverfront, April 23rd through the 25th. Our conference planning team is amazing, and they have been working really hard collecting the conference proposals that were submitted. Thank you for that time back in the fall. They've made those decisions. They've reached out to those who have been selected, and those individuals will be presenting at the conference. What I want you to know, again, if you're not able to make it to the annual conference, do not fret. We know that it's a great time to engage with folks in person, but this is really an opportunity to showcase some of your strengths, some of the work that you've been doing, shared amongst the membership who is able to come. But know that we're also trying to think about other ways. Annual conference is not the only way that we do professional development. So I hope that if you haven't signed on for free access membership, for those of you that qualify for that or have become a SACAC member, that you really think about how you want to engage, how you want to learn. Our website in and of itself, sacac.org, certainly is going to give you a host of references, some of which have been mentioned a couple of times. So I want to make sure that you check that out when you have time, but there are a lot of great resources there. And if you have not had the chance to engage with our amazing executive assistant, Diana McAfee, you are missing out. She is definitely the glue that keeps all of SACAC together. But we have a lot of exciting things happening. Obviously, the time we spent together this morning is invaluable, and I hope that you found some nuggets, as Monique referenced, that you can use immediately in your day-to-day work. So with that, thank you, Monique, for your leadership. Thank you for all of you in attendance, and thank you for a wonderful presentation today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We hope you enjoyed the workshop. Again, look for that follow-up email and provide some feedback, and you'll also have access to the resources. Have a wonderful day, and I hope again that you become a member, and see you at the conference. Bye, everyone.